Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Tonight's episode, Xtreme 80s, your film, the 1986 potentially worst film of all time in that year, American Anthem, starring, I believe it's Mitch Gaylord, a 1984 Olympian, which is pertinent to the movie at hand. I, of course, am your host, Rob, co-creator of the Xtreme Movie Show, broadcasting to you live from the Indian Hills Studios, just west of Orlando, Florida, in the Pine Hills Palace. And I have, straight from the starting to be freezing Midwest, my guest tonight, as usual, RDV. Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. And I got to say, for watching this movie for the first time today, wow.
That was actually going to be my first question is since we love covering the 80s here on the Xtreme Movie Show, you picked this. Some people would call it a gem. Some people would call it a turd. Some would call it a golden raspberry, as it won, I think, several of those awards, considering the worst of everything on here. Since you just got done watching it about a half hour ago, tell me, how do you feel at the end of this movie? No matter if it's good or bad, how are you feeling?
Well, I don't know. It's a weird feeling. It's like, and I went into this movie, it's like, I know people are like, oh, like, you know, it sucks. It was boring. I fell asleep. I turned it off halfway through, but I'm like, I powered through it, and I was like, man, there's a lot of music going over the audio. They just don't want anybody to talk at all. They just wanted just like, you know, montage scenes. but it's like, basically, I'm just thinking like, man,
how do you feel? Not what you think. How do you feel? Quickly.
How do I feel?
Yeah.
I feel gymtastic.
Gymtastic. That's funny. And you know what? That's exactly why a few weeks ago when we talked about the 1984 movies be the death of cinema, it's because of this. And there's no other perfect example than American Anthem of 1986, the movie we're talking about, that totally exemplifies the 80s going completely over the top and turning into a music video. Because you could watch some guy who, all props to him, was a Olympic medalist for the 80s, and you got the blonde chick, and you've got all the stuff kind of slapped together with all this actually pretty damn good music, really.
It is.
And, you know, you've got strobes going off like crazy, which look horrible. You've got really bad looking gymnastics. You basically have all the things we'd be pissing and moaning about today slapped together in a film, except for no green screen. And yet you come out of there feeling kind of pumped, feeling like, hey, I feel pretty good about myself. I feel pretty good about America. This is what 80s film does to you. It doesn't matter how bad it is, it's going to get you pumped up. So, yeah, American Anthem. So,
I gotta say though, the music in here is like, wow, because I said, like, the music for being a bad movie, the music is like, wow. It's like when you read a comic book, you get a bad story, but the artist is so great, it almost balances it out for me. I got John Parr, who was big back in the 80s. You got Mr. NXX.
They were huge. Huge.
Stevie Nicks, Graham Nash, Andy Taylor, former player, I think he was a bass player for with Gene Simmons and Kiss, wasn't he? Pretty sure. I thought he was in Kiss.
Well, Gene Simmons was the bass player for Kiss.
Yeah.
Andy Taylor, was that Duran Duran? I don't know.
Well, yeah, Duran Duran and Power Station, yes. Yeah.
Well, then you also had Alan Silvestri did the score for it, and what movie was he fresh off of from 1985? The #1 movie of that year, Back to the Future. So yeah, they spared no expense at this movie to make it as 80s as possible, because otherwise it typically wouldn't succeed. You're not watching it for the actual gymnastics. Seems like you come away with an appreciation for what it takes. You and I had talked also about another great 80s film that this sort of has a spiritual connection to, in a sense, and that's Vision Quest. And in Vision Quest, even though it's not really a wrestling movie and it revolves around it, with Vision Quest, you came away with the idea of just how difficult it was for something that is pretty standard in wrestling, and that's gaining weight, cutting weight, and making weight, running in all rubber suits and sweating and stuff like that. Things that happen if you're a bodybuilder or a wrestler. At least there you had an appreciation for what they went through. Here, it's just the backdrop. It's so she can do her little routine, which really isn't very good. It's so she can do her little split, straight-legged thing, putting her leg around the dude or whatever that kind of makes you go in the 80s. Oh, I want to be with a gymnast. Look how sexy she is. You know?
This whole movie, it was focused on sex appeal. You got the guy, whatever, who looks like basically a young version of Tom Welling. Or Tom Welling looks like a younger version of this guy now in the day. Because I can't help it. I was like, this is like freaking jacked Tom Welling, in Smallville, but it's like doing gymnastics and stuff, and just like pissing him on because his daddy didn't love him.
It's true, and it's a perfect example of, okay, why the hell didn't these two guys just talk one day? Dad's working on the car, and son comes out to do something, and hey, can you hand me the wrench over there? Sure, here you go, Dad. And they just start talking. No, it has to be miscommunication, because we all know fathers and sons don't ever talk, and this is the kind of nonsense that's been pervaded over the years and the decades too, and all that, and you never really get to see that. So it's just a matter of miscommunication, or even worse.
Well, the worst part is the opening. You get like 10 minutes of music. There's no dialogue. You see him just working on his. She's doing her gymnastics, and then you see the main guy. He's working at Harley Davidson plant, just basically grinding on a motorcycle frame. The same 10 minutes, and then makes it worse. He's wearing a sleeveless cutoff, so you can see his massive biceps, bro. And
of course,
I was just like, wow, we're getting the pretty boy, try and be a man here. And
he's hunky.
Yeah. So right then I was like, you know what? I'm already 10 minutes in. Let's see how bad this can get. And I kept going through, and I was like, wow, this is kind of a snore fest, and like, at least I get to look at the hot girl doing dance moves, I guess that's what they wanted, the male gaze, and occasionally the female gaze, because this guy, man, he never wore a shirt.
Well, you're not supposed to, especially if you've got a good body. And unfortunately, that aesthetic is gone by the wayside today. You don't see too many doing it. You see it a little bit here and there. But yeah, in the 80s, man, you just absolutely take off your shirt whenever you get the opportunity to do it. You have some just great 80s sounding music playing. It doesn't matter if the words mean anything or what's going on, if there's the drum machine or synth wave going on. You do something, you work up a little bit of sweat, you show your body, and then you crack open the cold one, which is usually Tab or Coke at the time if you weren't drinking beer. So, all those things are just pretty standard. I think people seem to forget that about the 80s. It was these nice little details and touches that, like I say, really exemplify this as a completely over-the-top 80s film. And we joke about that a little bit, but it's true. In this year, 1986, if I recall correctly, was also the same year one of the worst movies I've ever seen came out, but it was so bad people thought it was so lovable, and that was one called Howard the Duck. I mean, so when you talk about the complete trash that was out in the 80s, you might say these two, yet there is still a very vocal minority of people that go, I don't care how bad American Anthem is, I kind of like it, I kind of like watching it. And you know why? The answer is what you said when I asked you how you felt after watching it for the first time. And you said, well, yeah, it kind of sucks, it kind of whatever, but your heart rate was racing a little bit. It's like gymnastics Top Gun or something. I mean, it's just a music video basically. And in this case, they saw how wonderful Gymkata was, and I guess they said, man, we got to pump out another Olympian, because here's the whole thing about the Olympics and why this is significant. In 1980, as a child, I believe this was the year that the Olympics were being held in Russia, and I believe the U.S. boycotted. I was a kid, so I don't remember specifics, but I clearly remember my first 2 weeks watching Olympics over the summer. It was 1984, because that's when Michael Jordan was in the Olympics. Bobby Knight was the coach. Clearly remember all those games. We used to watch all of them. Totally got involved in it. Plus, I believe it was in L.A. And of course, America just destroyed everybody. Reagan's getting ready to go win his second term in a massive landslide. People are starting to make money. 80s are just exploding all over the place. And then you get a movie called Rocky IV, where you get Dolph Lundgren playing, of course, the bad Russian in here. If he dies, and all that. And he's taking steroids, and Rocky goes and beats up the Russian over in his own home turf. That screams Americana. Everybody loved it. It was totally unnecessary. Didn't belong anywhere at all in the film franchise. It was a decent flick, but that's the thing. That's why we've said that movie could have only been made in the 80s and worked. And Olympics were such a big deal that in beginning, I believe in 1988 is when, or actually it was 92. In 1988, even though we were having amateurs in it from America perform against the professionals all around the world and kicking their ass at everything, despite all the steroids and everything that goes on, America ended up not winning the most golds, and so they ended up in 92 putting their pros in there, and it's just not been the same. So that the Olympics even really died in the 80s as far as having any relevance as far as being professional amateur sports. The reason why that's important, because gymnastics was huge in 80 and 84 with all of them. So this is just not some guy that happened to have been in the Olympics and just got lucky or knew somebody somewhere and got put into a movie. The Olympics were a thing. Gymnastics was a thing. And you saw this even in, say, James Bond, For Your Eyes Only with Lynn Holly Johnson. She was in a couple skating moves, and she was in that movie too. So a little detail for those that are 80s historians and people like myself that actually lived it. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's a perfectly 80s film. I'm not even going to say it's a good film or a bad film, but I would tell you this. I would rather go watch this in the theater than most of the stuff that's out there today. Now, I know that's a strong take. How do you feel?
I think we should get to the plot now. We've talked about everything else.
We already discussed the plot.
The plot is
They didn't love me, and he's got to perform. All right, go ahead.
The whole thing was basically, yes. He wanted to come back to do work at gymnastics. The year before this, his dad basically, he messed up because he went to become a gymnast after basically throwing away a 4-year college, scholarship for basically playing football, So, and his dad was upset about that, and his dad got in a fight. His dad ended up breaking his arm. I'm surprised his dad didn't go to jail, but then it's 80s. People didn't call it because the wives are like,
you just slap them around a little bit.
Yeah.
Physical violence goes a long way.
The whole movie, though, it just felt like, I was like, wow, I'm surprised his mom hasn't left him. And the dad hasn't had a job for a year. He's sitting there, and whenever he has to do anything like computer, he's obviously computer illiterate, so that's probably one of the reasons why he can't get a job, because he's trying to submit applications through a little Apple computer instead of just going in person.
That was cutting edge at the time.
Yes, I mean, what was really funny though, because he just comes up to one of the matches, and one of the girls is like, "Oh, that guy, he used to be like one of the best here." It's like, what happened? Oh, he just dropped off, So, and then all of a sudden he goes up to he decides he wants to go, and he's like, "Hey, you want to go out sometime, or you go for a ride?" So we get the blonde girl, and Julie goes and ride with them. They play Andy Taylor's "Take It Easy" while they're driving those basically the Jeep, the one that everybody had. I think
the top down.
Yeah, top down Jeep, the orange, the truck Jeep, ugly. And he's like, "Hey," he's like, so you single? So he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "What do you want, a boyfriend?" I was like, and it worked. Throughout the movie is just you get these random sex scenes between them. It's like, and it has no point in the story whatsoever, just to show that they're an item. They love each other.
Well, of course.
Well, they're both. So now they get in that.
Like that's a bad thing.
So now they get in that and getting the little kid, because the main character lives on a ranch with his younger brother and his mom and his dad. His mom. Obviously, his dad has a temper problem. He likes to fight, and his mom, as far as hasn't left. The kid. And his little brother ends up getting on a little 3-wheeler trike, and he's like, "Screw this!" And he's basically have to fight the last fight that the father and the main star had, and so he tells him to F off. The kid gets on his bike, and he's like, "Oh crap, where's he going?" And then we get to see and there's a dirt bike chase scene with him. He's chasing after him through the woods, and he's looking at him. He's doing all these cool I want him to start doing the flips on the bike.
Yeah,
I was like, because come on, you're already doing gymnast stuff. Why don't you do that too, bro? Because he's extreme. No, so the little kid, he doesn't realize he's gonna go off a cliff. I'm thinking it's like this is out of nowhere, out of left field. I just started cracking up, and I was like, wow, that totally changed my mind about the whole entire movie. Like, wow, this movie was a snore. I'm like, yeah, there's some good, there's like a little bit of little sex scenes or little things, girls in tights, But all of a sudden, it's like the little kid's gonna go off the cliff. I'm like, I'm thinking $2. The kid manages to get off, ditch his bike before it goes off, and the guy, he's like, thinks the older brother thinks the younger brother's dead. Then he sees him there. He's grabbing. He's like, "Help me!" I'm like, "What the?" Pulls him up. So finally, after this, he realized, you know what? I shouldn't have broke up with my girlfriend. I shouldn't have been a douche. So he goes back, gets to the meet where they're gonna have to finally have see who's gonna be on the Olympic teams, the sports stuff. And they all go through their little time trials. She basically forgives him with no explanation or even saying sorry whatsoever.
When you're that hot, the women do that. Let's just be honest. And frankly, you're not supposed to have women around when you're training.
And then the best part about this his girlfriend Julie, she wants to do the floor mat routine, but she wants to use her own tape. And you get the sense of the gym coach who's basically useless in the whole entire movie. He's just like,
Rocky's
no.
trainer, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's like, no, you stick to the routine, you do your own thing, and like, okay. So she gets this kid who's basically find out he's an orphan or crippled too. And he's awesome at making synth music. And yeah, for no other reason just to get the cassette tape that she's going to dance to. That's the only reason he's in there. Otherwise, he's no important. They're not. It's like I thought at first he was going to be like the creepy dude's like, you know what? I kind of love you. It's like I'm thinking, wait, I'm just waiting for that cringy scene. He never did it though. I was like, you missed a chance because that's what everybody was thinking. But yeah, so then like they all do their things. The one girl who's on the team who was kind of like saying, "I'm better." Apparently, she has a bum knee. Now we find out there's the knee pad. And she's upset because the other girl basically showed her up. Julie showed her up and is like, yeah, man, you act like a bitch. People are gonna show you up at the end. It's one of those movies.
That's exactly right. It's a serious Karate Kid take.
Oh,
the thing with knee injuries back in the 80s, God, this brings up so much good stuff. Well, it's legit. You can get a really serious knee injury now, tear your MCL, LCL, PCL, any of your ligaments in your knee, get scoped by something that goes in there like a small little dental instrument. That's how small it is, and basically be almost full strength within 6 to 9 months if you're training right and the healing goes right. Back then, if you tore your knee, any kind of knee injury, it was almost a death sentence in terms of career sports. Pat Riley, who was coach of the Lakers at the time, had suffered that, and he's an all-timer for those that care about the basketball. But then also a guy named Mitch Kupchak who played for him. My first knee injury was watching him because he had this massive brace that seemed like it went from his hip all the way to his ankle, and he was like Frankenstein out on the court. So the fact that she had a knee injury then was really big. Now it wouldn't be a big deal because everyone would just think she's on the juice anyway. So, just want to point that out there for your Lakers fans and sports fans in the 1980s because that's relevant as well. Man, this is good stuff. American Anthem. Why is this considered a bad movie? I'm not seeing it.
I'm trying to think of who the other brother. There's another guy in here I've seen in other movies too. He plays like the buddy. He has the blonde hair. He has the buck teeth and kind of looks like I think almost like he was in Footloose. I can't remember not.
Well, you and I actually talked about Footloose when we reviewed Hot Rod on earlier on the Xtreme movie show, and we talked about the over-exaggeration of Andy Samberg's character, like when he gets so pissed off he has to go to a safe space out in the woods and he has to do his little dance before he starts falling, and he actually does the dance thing like from Footloose, but he also, I believe, does some tumbling in there too, which made me go, well, yeah, this is like Gymkata, but it wouldn't be Gymkata because that was a serious ninja movie. It would have been American Anthem. So a lot of people watching it, that film may not realize, God, he's really ripping off a lot of really great stuff from the 80s that people don't get, and that therein lies even more of the awesomeness of Hot Rod, is that it makes something like American Anthem even relevant again.
Yeah. Like I said, this is just like one of those movies I was like, wow, what is this? I've seen it before. It's like you guys were talking about Gymkata, and then I saw this pop up, and I was like, wow, this is actually a good song by it's like it's on track. And I was just like, wow. And then I look at it, I'm like, wow, they actually have a hot lead here too. Then I'm thinking like, wait, it's Tom Welling. No, it's not Tom Welling.
Yeah.
I can see why it was basically one of those movies where it's just like it bombed. So it's just clear. Like I forget what they said.
Well, there was starting to be a backlash against the over 80s excessiveness that was starting to make its way in film, and the problem with that is people that would point out, no, this is legitimately not a good film. The majority of people that would go see it would be like, you know what? We don't care. We feel good coming out of it. It's that perfect, when somebody starts singing the national anthem and you start getting all excited and, you get your hand over your chest and you get all fired up. It's like, the Rocky version of gymnastics, if you will. And it sounds really kind of cheesy in a way, but that's kind of what it's meant to be. And there's nothing wrong with it. And to your point about the music and the stuff going on, the guy that did this film is the same guy that did a film that I didn't think was very good, but people loved it, and that was Purple Rain with Prince. So, I mean, a lot of it's not whether you think it's a good film or not, it's whether you like it or not, or you're entertained or you feel good about it. And the 80s had it down to a T of it didn't matter what it would be. If if you're a martial artist, you'd have ninja coming out of the woodwork, and you could fight them one at a time. It was incredible. If you were a gymnastics guy, there was something to love. We talked about Rad. We talked about the skateboard movie. I mean, we've done all of these, and it's just, you can't go wrong with 80s film.
The late, great Roger Ebert said, as bad as any movie I've seen this year, and so inept that not even the gymnastics scenes are interesting. And then Cisco called the film complete junk. You can see more interesting gymnastics in the worldwide of sports than this garbage. What's funny is that Mitch Gaylord's performance film, he said he apparently earned him a Razzie Award nomination for the worst new star, where he lost the 6 guys and gals in the duck suit from Howard the Duck.
Yep. Howard the Duck was awful. Howard the Duck was the turning point for me going, the 80s are starting to die. That's when I noticed blood was coming out of the awesome decade of the 80s.
You ever look at this cover? I mean, wow, the cover of this movie, it looks like you're entering into a gay Tom Welling porn.
And I wouldn't care because it's such a great poster when you look at it. I mean, it's a fantastic, like I say, 80s.
The leather jacket, no shirt, and he's got the jeans, and he's got the wax chest. I'm thinking, like, man, it's almost. At first, I did a double take first. I wasn't sure it was Tom Welling, but then I also thought, like, is that Rob Lowe?
Rob couldn't do the gymnastics.
And then, I kept watching this movie. Whenever they did the Rings movie, I kept thinking Vince Vaughn from Old School. Still got it. He's got the cigarette in his mouth. Because this guy smokes too in this movie.
Actually, I think the dude you're referencing is Buddy. If that's the one with the curly hair, if I recall.
He was the one. Yeah, he was the one.
He kind of looked like he's
an
American version of Peter Frampton, which means nothing to you, but
I've seen Peter Frampton, so okay. I think it's somewhat similar. But I thought it was hilarious because I was just looking at it, I was like, wow, this guy really looks exactly like someone I've seen before in other movies, but I can't remember what his name was.
But see, in the 80s, like if you're going to go to the midnight movie and the Denny's afterward, you could go like that with your denim jacket over your bare chest, and nobody would have anything to say about it other than, hey, nice abs, bro. And then, of course, the women would, throw themselves at you like they do in this movie. So that's legit. That hasn't changed these days. Maybe it has today, but back then, oh no, this is like I say, it's a film that you're not going to go, man, I want to go see a gymnastic movie. Oh, by the way, I'm not gay, and I want to come out of there all pumped up because it's just an American feeling kind of film. You just go, oh, what the hell, I'll watch it. And then you're like, okay, it's not bad. It's kind of like, 80s or whatever. Then you realize how much you miss having a variety of films like this in the 80s to watch. And frankly, that's where some of the love for film has gone out of the way, because in the 90s, you don't have that very many films that have this kind of cheese factor to them. And by 2000, they're all gone. What do you think?
I don't know, man. Like I said, this movie is like caught me by surprise. I mean, I've known the Andy Taylor song before Take It Easy for it. It's a catchy song, but I never watched this movie because I've seen the music video where they're actually the 2 main stars of this movie are in there dancing stuff at a club, which has nothing to do with the actual whole entire movie. But I was just like, okay, I'll give it a shot today, and I was like, it actually was somewhat decent. But then again, I'm known for watching bad movies. so and then again, with everything that's going on today, I've set the bar really low for what really entertains me, because it's just like at this point, it's like when something like this is better than what's going out today, that's when when movies pretty much have failed us. But yeah. It's a fun movie though. There's just, like I said, the whole just coming out of you watch that whole dirt bike chase scene is like, I'm like, what the is this like? It's like a freaking chase scene in the middle of a gymnastics movie for no reason.
Well, one of the things I'll close on here as we finish up is that for me, I was a big Lakers fan in the 80s. That's why I referenced earlier some of the stuff there too and tied it to the movie. But looking at her profile, because JanetJones was somebody I didn't really know too well, but she's kind of hot and blonde and all that. And she is what she is in the film. Nothing negative about it, but I'm seeing here that she's married to, since 1988, the guy who, and you may know this better than I do, because I'm not sure if you're a hockey fan, she's been married to Wayne Gretzky.
Yep.
And Wayne Gretzky, because back then I'd have to get the Sporting News paper, the USA Today was the big one in color at school, and read my sports scores, because we didn't have ESPN was still in its infancy. It had only been around a few years at that point, and believe it or not, NBA Finals were on tape delay, at one point. So to see that and just see Wayne Gretzky's name every single time in the paper about he's like God in there too. And I'm like, oh, well, she was in this movie, and maybe because she was in this movie, she married hockey god. I don't know.
It was Stacey Maloney. I know I've seen. I swear this guy's been in other movies. He plays the friend. He's kind of calls him an asshole at the very beginning of the movie because the guy comes up, shows up late. And then we find out loosely that they're actually buddies. But he plays Kirk Baker in this movie, and I swear he looks like another actor. Maybe it's just because he has a Nicolas Cage buck teeth.
It's possible.
Yeah.
People were not afraid of buck teeth and freckles in the 80s, being shown on film. Let's just say that.
And Ronnie, the other buddy from Vision Quest, I was thinking like he's one of those guys too. Then again, like, there's so many people that look like in the 80s that were like one-hit wonders, and then they're gone. They're in one movie. And they were even supposed to be a main star. There was still, background. And
another example of that would be the Fat Boys, but we haven't talked about that movie yet. So just FYI, everybody, that might be coming soon.
Do we have to?
No, but that's why we need to. All right. Any last thoughts?
yeah, we're gonna start doing Rob's bad comics reviews. Our bad comedy reviews.
Yeah, so everybody, American Anthem, Mitch Gaylord and Janet something. It's 80s distilled. I mean, if you need a cheap 80s fix, go check this film out. It's not a canon classic, so it and nowhere near approaches the awesomeness of, say, Gymkata or anything from canon in the 1980s. But it definitely belongs there. And like RDV experienced, when you see something from the 80s and you come out of there feeling the 80s, you know what the 80s means. And the only difference is if you didn't live it at the time, it's hard to feel it as strongly, as intensely as like myself and other people do. But that being said, it's worth going back and checking out, because the more of this, I think, as somebody watches and digests, the more they'll understand how great and awesome the 80s were. That's why we call it the Xtreme 80s. Yeah. So for the doctor, for myself, I'd like to say thanks for listening, thanks for watching, thanks for sharing, everybody. Have a good night. And stay
as always, and Rob,
yes,
take it easy.
I will take it easy. Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.